Why in the Old Testament and throughout the world, why were animals sacrificed in worship services for God? It's an interesting question. In the Jewish tradition, I believe animal sacrifices were discontinued sometime after the life of Jesus Christ in the diaspora and the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. But in any case, animal sacrifices has several representations that are worth sharing. First off, animal refers to our body, to our five senses. To sacrifice the animal is, on the spiritual path, the willingness to discipline and transcend the natural impulses of the body. Yes, in sex and eating and pleasure and comfort and so forth. This is why in the long tradition throughout the world, spiritual devotees and aspirants engaged in self-mortification and fasting and other spiritual practices trying to temper the impulse of the senses. And no matter what age you live in, having some degree of self-control in dietary matters is even healthy. And so to sacrifice the animal is symbolic of sacrificing those animal impulses. This is not to denigrate our animal friends. That's nothing about that. Another aspect, though, is in my study of Jewish law, which I admit isn't very deep, nonetheless, we know in traditions that the animal brought to the altar for sacrifice wasn't supposed to have any blemishes. What does it mean to sacrifice an animal without any blemishes? And reminds me about Isaac, who was actually asked by God, according to the Old Testament, to kill his own son. So what are we talking about here? Again, in the broader picture of spiritual seeking God, loving God, seeking the identification with the eternal soul within us, sacrificing that which is precious to the ego. And so something without blemish means it's of high quality. And so bringing to the altar fresh fruits and vegetables, a harvest offering, we are saying that all good things come from the Lord. All good things come from the Creator. It's a recognition of that. Obviously, as far as we know, God doesn't actually eat these things from the altar. We actually partake of them, having been blessed by that offering, just as we bless our food before eating. Do you see? We consecrate our lives, our bodies, our actions, our desires, all to a higher power, to a higher wisdom, to a higher consciousness. This is the beauty of sacrifice of all sorts. Reining in one's desires. If you're cold, enduring the cold, even just for a few minutes before turning the heater on. We sacrifice in many ways when we sit to meditate, when we go to Sunday worship services. We put aside mundane things, the Holy Sabbath for Jews, for example. In the old days, businesses were closed on Sundays in recognition of the gifts of creation from a higher power. It's really a beautiful image. It's no longer appropriate and of any necessity for our own spiritual evolution to actually sacrifice animals. That's something nobody really thinks of. I don't imagine anyway. At least I don't. And so that's no longer useful to us. But there was a time, evidently, on this planet that sacrificing animals on the altar and this and that was an act of worship and was pure and noble to do. It's just that it isn't anymore. It had a noble purpose. It is a metaphor for something that is still necessary today. The offering of the little self and all of its comforts and pleasures, etc., all of its desires for wealth and status and that sort of thing, into the will of God. Thy will, Lord, not my will. So it's a beautiful thing. It just isn't necessary anymore.